Learning from textbooks. 3 steps of reading. Pre-reading, as the name suggests, happens before you read. Pre-reading involves surveying the chapter you're about to read. This is often called a quick read, as it's meant to be quick, no more than 5 to 10 minutes. Why do we pre-read? Well, in order to use our brains effectively and efficiently, we want to treat it like a well-organized filing cabinet. We want to put any new information into our brains in a logical and systematic way. The pre-read allows us to get an idea of the content we're about to learn and gives our brains a chance to start creating files for that information. Alternatively, if we just jump into reading without creating these mental files, we end up dumping all new information into our brains in a haphazard way. It's all in there, but because it isn't organized, it's very hard to retrieve. Picture it a bit like a trash can. Dumping new information into your trash can can make it very hard to retrieve that information at a later date. So let's discuss how to pre-read. First, what is it about? The goal is to activate any pre-existing background knowledge that you already have in your brain so that you can link new information to it. How is the information you're about to read organized? Browse quickly through the table of contents and any headings and subheadings to get a sense of what is covered in the chapter. Look for clues to the main ideas. Learning objectives, key terms, and chapter summaries will provide wonderful clues for the most important information in the chapter, so pay close attention to these. And are there any visual clues to pay attention to? Pictures, tables, and figures aren't just there to look visually pleasing. They are there to help explain or elaborate on any important textbook content, so take note of what's there. Okay, it's time for an activity. I'm going to show you a short passage that I'd like you to read. After reading, I'd like you to take some time to reflect on the experience of reading this passage. Was it easy or hard to understand? If it was hard to understand, consider what could have been added to make it easier. And for fun, I'd love for you to make a guess about what the passage is actually about. Once you see the passage on the screen, please pause the video until you've had a chance to read it and reflect on those questions. And then unpause for the remainder of the video. I'm guessing that you found this passage hard to understand. There is a lot of important information presented, but all without context or structure, which makes it a challenge to read and comprehend. What could have been added to make it easier to follow? Now, imagine if there was a title or headings and subheadings that would give great context for what you're reading about. The use of bold font for key words or numbered lists for the steps that are mentioned would have helped to organize the information and thus make it easier for your brain to process. The truth is, without any idea of the layout, structure, or topics that are coming up, it makes reading that much more difficult, as evidenced here. So, reading this paragraph is a bit like jumping into a chapter without a pre-read. You don't know what's coming or how it's structured, so it makes the task more difficult than it needs to be. Headings, bold and italic fonts, diagrams, these would make this information much easier to understand and retain, so take advantage of those things that are available in your textbook when they're made available. Make note of them in your pre-read, and then utilize them during the reading stage. Before we move on to the next slide, I should let you know that this passage is actually about doing laundry. Okay, now that the pre-read is done, it's time to read, actively, of course. When reading, it is hopefully obvious based on the last activity that you should be paying attention to headings. Headings help place details in the big picture and help you to create your brain's personal filing system. You should also be paying attention to text layout for the same reason. Notice the visual images that are given to you in the textbook and also try to create your own visual images of the content you're learning. if there aren't any provided to you. Your brain is best able to remember pictures rather than words. Always look for connections. How do the pieces that you're learning fit together as a whole? This helps place information in your filing system by grouping like things and in turn making the volume of information more manageable. As you're reading, label different types of information, definitions, examples, conclusions, etc. Come up with a consistent system to mark these things, as it will facilitate the ease of studying when it's time to prepare for exams. Active readers always ask themselves questions about the content they're reading. Ask yourself, why is this information important, and does it make sense? And as you're reading, selectively make note of the key concepts, either in a study note or by highlighting. The key here, though, is to be active. Don't rewrite or highlight the entire textbook. Instead, only make note of the things that are main ideas and the important supporting details. Once you've completed your reading, there's one more step, the post-read. This does not need to take place immediately following your reading, although you certainly can if you have time. However, this may be something you try and do a day or so later. At most, it's advisable to do your post-read no longer than 24 to 48 hours after completing your chapter, as after that time you'll have relatively less memory of the content. The job of the post-read is to reinforce and remember the textbook material. It involves surveying the chapter to reinforce the big picture. As you read through your chapter, you were likely focused on the small details. Imagine them like individual pieces of a puzzle. Each puzzle piece is important alone, but until they're all assembled together as a group and you can see the big picture and understand the significance, does it all come together? This survey allows you to see that big picture of the chapter. Predicting possible exam questions. It's never too early to start imagining what might be testable from the chapter. By creating a list of possible test questions, you've started to pull together a very valuable study resource. Self-testing. With the questions you've created or that have been provided in the chapter, test yourself and see what you've learned. It's important to periodically skim over previously read chapters or summary notes, perhaps every 1 to 2 weeks, to keep that content fresh in your memory. Every review you can fit in throughout the term will pay off as you get closer to exams. This graph shows evidence for the theory of regular review. As you'll see here in the first bar that represents a student who did not review, 10 minutes after reading their textbook, they have strong memory of the content, but already within 24 hours, they start to experience a drop-off. By 1 week and 1 month, their memory of that course material is next to nothing. If that same student fits in one post-read, one review, that drop-off is lessened significantly. Each subsequent review of the material has a significant positive impact on retention of the content. After 4 reviews, their memory of the content 1 month out is essentially the same as it was after their initial read-through. All of this is to say that any time you can devote to going back and doing some of the post-reading activities is time very well spent for your long-term retention and comprehension of the material. So now that you've learned about pre, during, and post-reading, it's a great time to reflect on any changes you might make to your reading. What have you learned in this video that felt like an aha moment for you? Was there anything new about reading that you learned that you'd like to try? Write down these reflections and set a goal to implement them into your reading moving forward.